I am the moderator of the panel. My name is John Dale Dunn, and I'm a Texas emergency physician. I teach emergency medicine at Fort Hood, Texas. I work for the Heartland as a writer, mostly in environmental issues, but I've got an opinion on everything because I'm an inactive lawyer. But I'm not a dangerous person. I'm a member of the bar, but I can't practice. I am glad and proud and honored to moderate this panel of extraordinary people. First speaker is a PhD who specializes in energy, who has been around for a fairly long time. Rob Bradley has been on some panels and some symposia with me on energy issues, and he comes out of the energy city, Houston, and without further ado, Rob Bradley.
Thank you. Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here at the second annual. I hope there's more annual events. Joe Bast is a good fundraiser, obviously, in these bad times, but it's great to see the record attendance. My presentation this morning is a little reaching. It's not a published paper, but my thinking on climate change is shifting a little bit from the pure science and economics of the issue to the why of the issue. I believe there's accumulating evidence that the anthropogenic warming is going to be at the low end or below the low end of the IPCC estimate, the 2 to 4.5 centigrade estimate for a doubling of atmospheric greenhouse gases in equilibrium. Certainly, if you look at the best guess of the IPCC, the 3 degrees centigrade, I think that is definitely a bad number, and there's going to be a lot of pressure in the future to bring the range down. The range has been going up a little bit with the different assessments, but I think it's got to come down, and it's something we should see in the 5th assessment that'll come out here in several more years. So I'm not a scientist, but I'm very intrigued. I've been intrigued from the beginning by Dick Lindzen and now Roy Spencer. You know, if these gentlemen are half right, the skeptics are going to win the debate, meaning that the anthropogenic warming is at the low end of the range. And if you turn to climate economists like Robert Mendelsohn of Yale, the sign of the externality switches from a negative externality to a positive externality. So I think that's all very good news. But given this, and for those of us that have studied the climate change debate since practically the beginning, I guess the beginning is being 1988, I'm spending a lot of my time, as are some others, on why the futile crusade. What is behind all this? We're supposed to be in the information age. Good science is supposed to drive out bad science. Why all the alarmism and the resistance to the great news for mankind that the anthropogenic warming is not at the upper end of the IPCC range? I think looking at the psychological reasons, certainly there's an anti-capitalist mentality and anti-industrialization, and this gets to Malthusianism that I'll discuss in a minute. I think there is definitely some intellectual error here where the easy answer with feedbacks, the answer that the models can, the equations of the models can handle is the wrong answer. And feedback effects, the microphysics of climate are so complex that it's going to be very hard getting the physics of nature into the models. We'll see if it can happen. But I think there's some intellectual error here. Certainly now there's rent seeking. And Robert Michaels, Pat Michaels, his brother, has written a book on this, looking at climate scientists as camping on the upper bound of the IPCC warming projection, where indeed that's a lot of warming. There's problems in doing all sorts of hypothetical analysis. But I want to get back to the Malthusian mentality. That I'll focus on that today. But what's behind all this is bad premises and emotion that has resulted in the quasi-religion that we find ourselves in today. We're supposed to be making mid-course corrections as we go along. I once worked for a company that did not make mid-course corrections and went down dramatically, and that was Enron. And coming out of that, you see the bad behaviors, the arrogance, not making changes, not admitting to error. And I think that the lessons from Enron certainly apply to the climate debate. And I have a book, Capitalism at Work. I have it for sale at ridiculously low prices, if any of you would like to see me afterwards. Well, what is a Malthusian virus? Part of it is a penchant for being alarmed. And I think this has to do with the stasis mentality that nature is optimal and man's influence on climate or on nature in any direction just can't be good. I think the Malthusian, many natural physical scientists don't think in terms of economics and trade-offs. Health is wealth. A wealth is health perspective. There's an intolerance of dissent from the Malthusian worldview, where you buy into this worldview and you just never want to leave it. You've spent too much time arguing for it in print or for other reasons. And it's a tough thing to change your mind late in the game. But what's also part of the Malthusian mentality is having a blueprint for correction, and I'll get to that in a minute. But part of the result of this is they will go so far as to say that false alarms are okay because we protected against the false alarms, and gosh, they didn't happen. You know, I was part of the solution. And there's a science article from about 5 years ago, false alarm over environmental false alarms, that gets into this mentality. Even if we're wrong, it's still good because we prepared for it. I'm going to focus on the history of Malthusianism here in a minute, and I have 5 chapters in my book where I go over this history, beginning with Malthus, that saw that population was going this way, increasing geometrically, food supply increasing arithmetically, and the gulf between the two would have to result in misery or vice, population coming down from war, diseases, to the level of food supply. And Malthus backed off a little bit on this, but in an essay on the principle of population in the later editions, he was really sticking to the misery or vice interpretation. This was applied to energy in a book that I think is the most important book in the history of energy and mineral economics, The Coal Question. England was going to no longer be competitive with its coal supply, and the young people of England were going to be migrating to other countries. But that ended up being very exaggerated. But even right after World War II, 2 books here, Our Plundered Planet, Road to Survival. This is kind of the early Paul Ehrlich view of the world. Paul Ehrlich's Population Bomb, which to me was the beginning of modern Malthusianism. Y'all have heard about this book. It's amazing reading. And Paul Ehrlich, of course, is the mentor and co-author of John Holdren, the current science advisor to President Obama. And coming out of the Vietnam War, you have a lot of dissent sort of toward the establishment, and a lot of this went over to the environmental movement. At the same time, there's record population increases and a number of environmental groups forming in the late 60s, early 70s, And in the middle of this, of course, was Earth Day. There is Paul Ehrlich and John Holdren. Their E equals PAT equation. The negative environmental impact has to do with some combination of increasing population, increasing affluence, increasing technology. The limits to growth. We're going to run out of mineral resources one by one in 1972. And then kind of a small is beautiful mentality. And the current Obama stimulus plan, the bailouts, the New Deal, which I think can more accurately be called the Malthusian New Deal. Somehow the limits to growth are going to turn into growth for the United States economy. There's a lot of tension in there, and there's a Malthusian wing of the Obama administration that are keeping very quiet. You know, they're looking at less growth, less carbon footprint, and they kind of like it. And they'd love to get rid of this idea of growth and rising expectations. But they're very... Who's the guy? This is E.F. Schumacher from England. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. Small is beautiful. You know, less growth. We need to get rid of the idea of growth. But you know who, to me, is the father figure or the original bad guy in the energy politicization we have today? I would say it's Richard Nixon, because it was Nixon's wage and price control order of August 71 that created energy shortages, oil shortages, even before the Arab embargo. So you have hearings in Congress over shortages, and if you have shortages, what is that? What is the status solution to that? That is energy conservation. We have to engineer an equilibration of supply and demand because we can't do it with price. So energy conservation becomes good for its own sake, or conservationism versus energy conservation. So really the energy crisis and the politicization of energy even predated the Arab embargo, and it's gotten worse and worse since. Climate change, and you look at a graph like this and it's already biased. But to me, a real hint of the Malthusian, the stasis mentality came in a tract that Paul and Anna Ehrlich and John Holdren published in 1977, where here they're talking about a global cooling trend, natural, but then they talk about how there, with CO2, greenhouse gases, there's an artificial man-made global warming trend. And what they're saying here is we have cooling, we have warming at the same time, but this can't be good, because part of it is because of the human influence. They're not going to cancel each other out in a right way. And there was a global cooling concern from sulfate aerosol emissions. There's a global warming concern from CO2. But none of this can be good because it's the human influence on climate. And here's a great quote from Amory Lovins et al. "The planet has been delivered in perfect working condition and cannot be exchanged for a new one. Please don't adjust the thermostat or the atmosphere controls were preset at the factory." Sort of the God of nature is optimal. This, to me, this says so much. World Watch Institute, playing God with climate. The assumptions are natural climate is optimal, climate is very fragile, and that the anthropogenic influence, warming, cooling, just can't be good. And Robert Mendelsohn of Yale has a quote here: "This is an unstated myth in ecology that natural conditions must be optimal. That is, we must be at the top of the hill now. But of course, given the wide distribution of temperatures across the earth, that cannot be true for everyone." And there's a book that came out some years ago, The Future and Its Enemies, where Virginia Postrel uses a term, stasism versus dynamicism, where there's change and we embrace change. And she says the dynamic promise is not one of a particular carefully outlined future. Do we search for stasis, a regulated, engineered world, or do we embrace dynamicism, a world of constant creation and competition? Statism believes that a good future must be either the product of detailed technocratic blueprints or the return to an idealized, stable past. Now, a quick case study of the Malthusian virus with Gerald North, who is a well-respected mainstream climatologist, head of the climatology program at Texas A&M, and he and I are good friends, and I hope we'll continue to be good friends after this presentation and in the future. The last email I got from Dr. North coming to this conference was, it sounds like a Star Trek convention. Y'all are going to all be going around with Richard Lindzen mask on. How do you like that? And I said, hey, that's kind of funny. That is funny. So he said that against me. I'd like to share with you some quotations from him. Very, very well respected here. I engaged Dr. North to be a consultant for Enron, progressive Enron, on climate change issues. And in this email here, he says that, you know, I've talked to my friends. I'd like to do it because Enron is progressive, meaning that we're buying into climate alarmism. If this was ExxonMobil or an oil major, I don't think he would have signed on. And he's not making a lot of money on it. He's an hour and a half from Houston. A lot of emails. He would come give us seminars, and it was a fairly innocent thing. But the first time that Jerry North was coming in to address Enron executives on the climate change issue, we go over all the issues, and then he sends me an email right before he's coming down where he's kind of throwing out what we don't know is bad, a lot of alarmism, and I'm going to share with you this quotation. He says, I think there is also an awesome fear of the unknown by climatologists, and I am one of them, who work on this problem day in and day out and who know how little we really know. It's a scary possibility that we could enter into a new regime of climate, such as a change in North Atlantic deep water formation, an increase in El Nino frequency and or intensity, an increase in hurricane, storm, etc. There are many others. Most of us think there's a heavy responsibility on us. Everyone is counting on us, and I do not think it cowardly to say we are afraid of what we don't know. Well, I sent an email back to him. I said, hold on. You know, if you look at the IPCC third assessment, they're very clear on extreme weather events that there's really no evidence. And then he emails back to me, I apologize to you for bringing up these weird potential consequences. I was using it merely to explain why so many in-close climatologists are so willing to err on the side of caution. I think this rankles Dick Lindzen tremendously. Of course, I understand his point of view, but would I be bold and brave to take his stand where I will not be around to suffer the consequences? Dealing with CO2 will be expensive, but I have not the foggiest idea of what the cost of not dealing with it will be. Your point about hurricanes, extreme weather events, precip are right on. There is not proof or even model evidence that there will be a problem. Okay, so this is the professional scientist who throws this stuff at me. I come back at him, and he backtracks. Why was this done? Why did we go through this? Now, more recently, we had an email exchange where he says, eventually, though, you're probably right about the system's inability to act to prevent man-made climate change. Eventually, though, something will have to happen or the planet will not be habitable in a century. I write back and I say, look, the planetary emergency to me is 1.5 billion people don't have access to modern forms of electricity. The planet is not inhabitable to them. And North responds to that by saying, quote, I had no business saying that the planet would be uninhabitable by a century's end. I do not doubt that people will be around much no matter what, barring nuclear holocaust. Things might be pretty unpleasant, but they will be here. Apologies. So this is another example of the Malthusian mindset. What we don't know, it just can't be, it can't be good. Tom Wigley has said, The human influence on climate should be guilty until proven innocent. How many minutes do I have? Just a few. Now, Wigley and I got into an email exchange, and I've got to share this with you. This is back in 1999, and I'm going back and forth with him, challenging his alarmism, and he sends me an email that says, "Your approach is to assume people like me have some pro-environment axe to grind, and worse, that we are guilty of distorting the science until proven innocent. I have no axe to grind, no preconceived ideas, and no political or ideological agenda. I just try to do the best I can as an honest scientist." Well, a couple of weeks later, Wigley is really mad at me for complicated reasons. I have some of these emails up on a website. And he writes a letter to the chairman of Enron, Ken Lay, saying that Rob Bradley is a loose cannon and that I am compromising Enron's progressive stance on climate alarmism by my emails and the other things I'm doing. So, so Wigley is just he has no political or ideological agenda. He's saying here, he talks about the Pew Center, and Enron's a member of the Pew Center, so my views on climate change are very different from the company's, and Wigley's trying to get me fired. But the good news is that Ken Lay is a busy man, and he's trying to please all people, so I got to help him with his letter back to Tom Wigley, and we haven't heard back from Dr. Wigley here in just about a decade. Jimmy Carter, limits to growth. Here we have the new president and a new limits to growth. Be ready for the word sacrifice, and you heard talk on that earlier. But for us non-Malthusians that believe in human ingenuity, that believe that the science of climate alarmism is exaggerated from our best evidence and from what we don't know about climate, given that the data of climate sensitivity is very much on the low end of the IPCC range. We believe that we can capitalize on anthropogenic good. There's positives, not only negatives from the human influence on climate, and for the negatives, a little sea level rise, for example, that we can modify, customize, and adapt to natural and anthropogenic negatives. But I think there is a public policy imperative for more capitalism, not less, free trade, free migration in the face of climate change, natural and man-made. Thank you.